I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, new details on the sale of the biggest newspaper in San Diego. Also, preparing for what could be the worst wildfire season ever, the major concern for firefighters on the front lines.
Investigating the mystery of the blob, a stretch of unusually warm water off the west coast. I'm Amitha Sharma. We'll take a look at the blob's potential connection to California's drought, plus hooking up before tying the knot, the generational shift in attitudes about sex.
Coming home to a nice green lawn, it looks good. Coming in my driveway, it looks nice. And I don't want to lose it. I don't want to give it up.
Another type of green driving San Diego homeowners to rip out their lawns. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. State and local fire officials are warning San Diego County is poised for one of the worst fire seasons ever. A powerhouse of fire officials gathered today at the CAL FIRE Air Attack Base in Ramona, urging us to be prepared. County Fire Chief Tony Meacham described what we could be up against in the coming months due to those extreme drought conditions.
That we're very concerned about our water sources. The helicopters dip out of stock ponds or lakes. A lot of our water sources in these counties have dried up. They're not available. So our aircraft are going to be making longer trips to fill with water. We're also looking at using treated water.
Meacham says people should prepare for creating a defensible space around their home and having an emergency supply kit and evacuation plan. The dream of green lawns may be drying up here in Southern California. The state's prolonged drought forcing homeowners to make tough choices. KPBS reporter Claire Trageser shows us how they are adapting.
So I want it to look nice, and I'm trying to find...
Joey Davis stands amidst the lush green grass in front of his Allied Gardens home and talks as if he's saying goodbye to an old friend.
Coming home to a nice green lawn, it looks good. Coming in my driveway, it looks nice. And I don't want to lose it. I don't want to give it up.
Davis signed up for the city's turf rebate program, which pays homeowners $1.50 a square foot to take out their grass lawns. He says he needs the rebate to help cover the cost of his redesign.
I'm not going to go make it look like a desert and have it be ugly. If it's going to replace this nice green, I want it to look nice. And so my estimate is, at least $2,000 if I do it myself.
He's lucky he signed up early. In mid-April, San Diego poured $750,000 into the rebate program. Within a week, all of that money dried up. Now the city won't offer more rebates until July. Davis says he won't take out his lawn without the rebate.
I can't justify spending a couple $1,000s.
The city doesn't have enough money to pay everyone who wants to take out their lawns. At the same time, San Diego's Public Utilities Chief Hala Razak told KPBS Evening Edition that most San Diegans really shouldn't have grass lawns.
If the lawn is used actively for in the backyard, kids playing or ball fields and so on, then obviously that is a good use for it. But if it's an ornamental lawn in the front yard, the only time you use it is when you're mowing it, then it really does not belong in San Diego.
Every square foot of lawn removed saves 44 gallons of water a year. The last round of rebates should eliminate 500,000 square feet of grass, saving enough water to fill 33 Olympic swimming pools. Because the rebate money ran out quickly, it's likely San Diego could be saving more.
This is like a canvas waiting to be painted, isn't it?
Landscape designer Marilyn Guidro scans a large green plot in Rancho Santa Fe, which is notorious for its high water use. She's working with another designer, Nan Sturman, on landscaping to replace the grass.
Because it's just such a big flat space, I wonder if maybe we should do some elevations?
Yeah, some mounds.
Some mounds?
I could see that, especially from the walls.
Her job is to try to persuade people to consider other options, including native plants like bluegrass, agave, or cacti. And recently, business has been booming. Sturman is changing the name of her business from Plant Soup to Waterwise Gardener. That's because she wants to help people with drought-resistant landscaping. And other landscape designers who focus on water conservation report demand for their services is way up. Sturman is enthusiastic about San Diegans branching out to plants that are native to the local climate.
Succulents and other low water plants are some of the most colorful and beautiful plants that we have available to us. It's a matter of knowing which plants to use and then being a little bit experimental, because we all know what to do with lawn, but a lot of people don't know what to do with those other kinds of plants. It's just being brave and doing it.
While more homeowners are willing to bravely ditch their lawns, the city hasn't persuaded everyone. At a press conference, San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer was asked whether he plans to take out his grass.
In my household, just like all households, we've been taking steps to lower our consumption. That's what San Diegans have been doing. That's what we're encouraging to do. And I think, as I said before, that's a way of life that everybody's getting together to make sure everyone is doing the right thing, and that includes everybody up here on the stage.
His spokesman confirmed that what you just heard means Faulconer's grass is here to stay. Claire Tregesser, KPBS News.
KPBS video journalist Nick McVicker helped produce that story. State utility regulators have decided not to approve building a new gas power plant in Carlsbad until they have more information about the alternatives. KPBS North County editor Allison St. John has the latest on today's meeting. Allison, this project has been in the works for well over a decade. Why did the commissioners decide to wait another month?
Well, just to put you in the picture, this is the plant that is up there on the site of the old Encina power plant that you can see from I-5 with the big smokestack. And the new plant that's being proposed would be more efficient, but it's still a fossil fuel plant. And the commissioners are well aware that the climate, both meteorologically and politically, is changing, and that they need to be finding sources of energy that are cleaner and not so many fossil fuel plants. You know, the governor has just said he wants to reduce carbon emissions by 40% from 1990 levels by 2030. So they would like to see the bids that were given to SDG&E in response to a request for proposal from renewable energy producers. Apparently they did get a lot of bids earlier this year, and they've only just now produced them. So the commissioners say they want to see what those bids say to see if perhaps renewable energy might be a better alternative.
And Allison, remind us, what's at stake with this decision?
Well, there's three things really, Dwayne. There's reliability, and President Picker did point out that there was a blackout in 2011, and he said he didn't think renewables are necessarily up to the task of being completely reliable in replacing the power from San Onofre, which of course was shut down in 2012. Commissioner Florio said that there would be a giant hole in the grid after San Onofre shut down, and also Encina is going to shut down, the gas plant, in 2017. Then there's the cost issue, of course. The proposed plant would cost $2.6 billion, and unless we know what those bids that SDG&E has from renewables, we don't know how competitive they would be. And finally, of course, there's emissions, which is becoming a more and more important issue. And I think the commissioners would really like to avoid building another fossil fuel plant if they could, but they need to see, first of all, what the renewable alternative is.
All right, KPBS North County editor Allison St. John. Major changes on the way tonight for the biggest daily newspaper in San Diego. Tribune Publishing will buy it. The price tag, $85 million. The company also operates the Los Angeles Times. It's a story we've seen play out across the country with major metro publications. For more on what it all means, KPBS reporter Amitha Sharma joins us live outside the UT San Diego headquarters. Amitha?
Well, Dwayne, first a little history. Doug Manchester bought the Union Tribune back in 2011 for $110 million. Within 1 year, he came under fire by subscribers who accused him of using the paper to wage a propaganda campaign based on his personal politics. They said that he did this by the types of stories that he chose to cover and through front page editorials. I spoke with Los Angeles Times publisher Aaron Buettner today. He said that kind of journalism is a thing of the past. He said, quote, "We check our politics at the door here." Here's more of what he had to say.
To get to a point where we can publish information directly to that community of interest. And by say publish, it could be a video, it could be a podcast, it could be in print, it could be all different forms, it could be an event. But if we speak directly first to those communities of interest, I see a real opportunity both from a business standpoint and to better connect with the customer.
Thank you so much.
Now, this $85 million deal to purchase the UT is expected to close in about 30 days. And within the next year, sometime, the paper is going to move out of this Mission Valley headquarters office to another location. Amitha Sharma, KPBS News from Mission Valley.
It may do more than save you from the measles. New research shows measles shots could fight off other illnesses. Researchers found the measles virus made kids' immune systems forget most of what they've learned. This left them vulnerable to other diseases for as long as 3 years. They say measles vaccinations help protect kids from potentially fatal infections. Lost in translation, there's a new push to help patients in California understand their prescription medication. A new bill would require California pharmacies to provide prescriptions with labels or instructions in languages other than English. Pharmacies already are required to provide verbal translations. The bill moves next to the Assembly. People with mental illnesses are getting out of prison only to be sent back. State lawmakers unveiled a plan to get them help instead of sending them to prison. Legislators say those in prison who have mental illnesses are unable to keep themselves out of prison once they are released, and the pattern doesn't address the root cause of the problem. Expense reports say jails spend up to 3 times more money on those afflicted with mental illness. Lawmakers say it's a burden to taxpayers. The plan would introduce interventions to treat mental health issues as an alternative to serving more prison time.
There are too many people in our overcrowded jails and prisons who are living with mental illness, who can serve their time, if you will, outside of jail while getting the treatment that they need to ensure that they don't reoffend.
No comments were made about how to keep adults with mental illness from going to jail in the first place, but the plan does include giving more funds to counties. U.S. immigration officials are considering a request for humanitarian parole for 5 Mexicans who want to be reunited with their families north of the border. KPBS Fronteras reporter Jean Guerrero explains.
Humanitarian parole allows temporary entry into the U.S. for foreigners with a compelling emergency. Today, 5 families went to the San Ysidro port of entry to ask for that parole. The Ledesmas are one of those families. Victor Ledesma was living in the U.S. illegally. 5 years ago, he went to visit his dying father in Mexico and couldn't return. His 9-year-old son, Yethvik, had his first epileptic seizure about a month after the separation. Yethvik and his mother are both U.S. citizens. Today, the Ledesmas went to the San Ysidro port of entry to give immigration officials a letter from a UC San Diego neurologist. The doctor recommends reuniting the family because anxiety and poor sleep are contributing to the boy's seizures.
He asks that the family please be reunited so that the health of my son doesn't worsen.
4 other families also requested humanitarian parole, and now they're waiting for an answer. Jean Guerrero, KPBS News.
A state appeals court says police can withhold license plate scans that are used to check vehicles associated with crimes, such as stolen cars, child abductions, or arrest warrants. Officers are increasingly using the automated devices mounted on their patrol cars. ACLU requested the data, saying it could be used indiscriminately, but the court rejected the request. Check this out. San Diego biologists have discovered new populations of a rare coastal plant known as the orchid's spine flower. The plant was thought to be extinct in 1990, but it was rediscovered later that decade. It remains listed on the federal endangered species list. Recent discovery doubles the number of populations of the low-lying flower. The plant only grows in sandy soil found along San Diego's coast. Scientists from around the globe were in San Diego this week discussing a warming phenomenon along the Pacific Ocean. Amitha Sharma talks with a climate researcher about the blob and its impact on sea life.
It turns out that the blob may be to blame for California's severe drought and the starving sea lions on beaches. The blob refers to a stretch of unusually warm water about 1,000 miles wide and 300 feet deep along the west coast. Climate researcher Art Miller with Scripps Institution of Oceanography is in studio with me to explain the blob. It appears that scientists first discovered the blob back in 2013. Is this area of warm water related to global warming? Do you know what caused the blob?
Well, we know what caused the blob mechanistically, in the sense that the atmosphere was in an anomalous state for many months, and that's what essentially drove the pattern of warming that we've observed. That same atmospheric pattern that has been forcing the ocean to be warm is essentially the same pattern that's been causing our drought. So it's not that the blob has any real influence on the atmosphere when it comes to causing the drought. It's basically a signature of the same atmospheric pattern that has driven the drought over the last couple of years.
So is there a connection, though, between climate change and this blob?
The climate change aspect, well, we never really know until we look, 10 years in the future and see whether the climate has actually, moved into this new state for a long period of time. But what we can say is that this warm condition that we're observing right now would look very similar to what we would see about 50 years from now if global warming was the thing that was driving it. Right now, it looks to be a natural climate variation and not a signature of global warming. But it essentially can help the ocean to emulate what will happen 50 years from now when it is going to be warmer in the upper ocean. And we can look now at the marine ecosystem and try to use that as sort of a diagnostic tool of what to expect in the future, even though the mechanism driving it isn't necessarily global warming.
And what is the tie between the state's current record drought and this patch of warm water?
Right. So the same atmospheric flows that drove the ocean into this warm state are the same flows that prevented rainfall events in the wintertime that led to the drought that we have right now. That's the connection.
So since warm water can emit heat into the air, causing moisture and rain, is there any indication that our drought might be turning around as a result of this warm water and that we might be in for wetter weather?
That's something that you can't use the ocean to make that distinction. The ocean does have two particular effects on the atmosphere that you can associate with the warm water. One, if you have this really warm water mass next to the California coast, during the times when we have a marine layer, the marine layer becomes more unstable and breaks up, so there's actually less clouds and more sunshine due to the warm water. That's a local effect right along the coast. The second thing is that as the air moves across the ocean, if it's anomalously warm, and then arrives in land, of course it picks up a little bit of heat and it's a little bit warmer, but it really doesn't cause the rainfall events. Those are being driven by atmospheric processes that are on a much larger scale and are not determined by the anomalous state of the ocean.
So let's talk about sea life. It's believed that this warm water is affecting sea life. In what way? Tell me about that.
Oh, that's the thing that's really exciting, because here you have this 100-meter thick mass of warm water that's capping the processes in the ocean that tend to set up the basics of the marine ecosystem. That is, we need to get nutrients that are buried at depth up to the surface, and that warm water is essentially a stratified cap that keeps that mixing from happening. So even in the presence of upwelling favorable winds that can drive the marine ecosystem into producing the phytoplankton, the zooplankton, the fish that feed on that, the marine mammals that feed on the fish, even though that the upwelling variable winds are happening, that warm water mass is slowing that process down. And so we don't really know what's going to happen with the entirety of the marine ecosystem over this time period of the warm anomaly.
So the food is there, but the fish can't get to it.
The nutrients are trying to get up to the surface, but it's being blocked by this warm water mat at the top of the ocean.
And so what are some initial effects of that you're seeing?
It's off the California coast and off the U.S. West Coast. There's been a reduction in productivity that's been associated with that. So, for instance, the number of sardines has been reduced particularly, and that's a forage fish for things like the California sea lions. And so a lot of the die-offs may be associated with the lack of the sardines being available in the diet of the sea lions. And that then leads to pups that are malnourished, and then they end up on the beaches that we like to try to rescue. And on the other hand, if you go up into the Gulf of Alaska, that warm water mass goes all the way up into the Gulf of Alaska, and it's actually, we've seen some increases in productivity up there because it's a different physical system that supports the ecosystem.
So it sounds like there's a lot of fluctuation here.
Right.
Art Miller, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you.
I'm Gwen Eiffel on the next News Hour, how the recent unrest in Baltimore damaged its economy. That's Thursday on the PBS News Hour.
A rescue story with a furry heart. San Diego Humane Society saved 83 neglected rabbits found living under harsh conditions similar to those found in puppy mills. They came from a rabbit farm in Riverside. PETA asked the Humane Society to help. Now they're looking for new homes for the rabbits. Something about the birds, the bees, and the millennials. It looks like they're behind changing attitudes on sex before marriage. Amita Sharma has more on a study from San Diego State.
The millennials' sexual behavior is turning up some surprises. While this generation is far more accepting of sex outside marriage, they are having fewer partners than their parents. All of this is contained in a new study led by San Diego State University professor and Generation Me author Jean Twenge. She joins me now. So there seem to be some contradictions among millennials. On the one hand, these are the folks who brought us friends with benefits. On the other hand, they're having fewer sexual partners than their parents. How do you explain that?
Yeah, so it was a little bit of a mystery because we did find the millennials were the most accepting of any generation of premarital sex, yet their baby boomer parents had on average about 11 partners, and then the millennials or Generation Me had on average about 8. And we did a special statistical adjustment for age to make sure it wasn't age that was causing that difference. And so we had to come up with an idea about why this might have been happening. So one possibility is that HIV and AIDS was already on the scene when they came of age sexually in their adolescence. So this is something they were always aware of. It could also be the friends with benefits, like you mentioned, that if that's with a smaller number of people, then perhaps that would lead to fewer sexual partners.
So does that then mean that this hookup culture, which we typically associate with this generation, has been exaggerated?
It might have been exaggerated a little bit. So the one thing is, hookup doesn't necessarily mean full-blown intercourse, and so that may be part of it. Maybe they're goofing around with more people but not having sex with as many people. So I think that is a possibility. It does look like they are having sex with acquaintances more from another survey question. So there could be some, I think it's a little hard to figure out exactly why it went down, but there's these possibilities.
So millennials also appear to be starting their sexual activity later in life, later than their parents. Why?
Yeah, so there's some other studies find this. Studies of teenagers find that today's teenagers are less likely to be sexually active than teenagers were, say, in the early 1990s. And this might come back to them being an overprotected or protected generation. So they're first generation to be put in car seats and to say, oh, you can't walk to school alone. So that caution may be extending towards sexuality, both in their teenage years and in adulthood.
And millennials, according to the study, appear to have fewer biases against homosexuality. But is that really revealing? I ask because probably their parents and their grandparents have shifted their attitudes over the years as well, right?
Well, somewhat. And so we did look at that because that's called the time period effect. So something that changes in the culture that affects people of all ages. And then as opposed to a generational effect of attitudes that you form when you're young. And there has been some of both when it comes to attitudes toward homosexuality. But we found that the primary driver was generation, that older people, have shifted their views somewhat, but that the much bigger part of the change was in generations, that millennials are much more accepting. So, for example, among all adults, the percentage who say that homosexuality is not wrong at all is about 42%, and then among millennials, it's 56%. So they are different from the older people, even at this moment in time.
Is there really a big difference between the millennials and the previous generations?
Yeah, absolutely. Not in everything, but we found in a long list of studies we've done that there are some things that make millennials stand out. So these more tolerant and accepting attitudes is certainly one of them. And then they also have many other individualistic traits as well. So they view themselves more positively and a little more materialistic. And they also seem
And why
to...
do you think that is,
Yeah.
that they view themselves more positively?
Well, we really think that it's part of this general movement in American culture toward individualism. And some of that is a time period effect that's affected everybody, and some of it is it affects the younger generation more because this is the only thing that they've ever known. And we find, say, in American books that they're more likely to use I, me, and mine now than they used to, and a little less likely to use we and us. Same thing shows up in song lyrics. The culture has really shifted toward much more self-focus. And usually when you get more self-focus, you're going to get a more positive self-view. So millennials are more likely to say they are above average in a number of skills.
Very quickly, how honest are people typically in studies like this?
Yeah, so that's always the danger in survey research. But the folks who run these surveys tend to say, people actually, you can ask them any question about sex and they'll answer it. What they don't like is when you ask them how much money they made in the last year. That's what they don't want to talk about. But sex, they're pretty willing to be honest.
Jean Twenge, we've got to close it there. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you.
Things may be drying out for San Diego this weekend if you have any outdoor plans. Sun returns along the coast, temperatures mostly in the 60s. Some lingering possibility of showers inland with temperatures in the 60s and 70s. Cooler in the mountains, 40s and 60s there. Some rain possible in the desert, temperatures in the 70s up to the 90s. Here's a look at what we are working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom on Morning Edition. Today's veterans often suffer from PTSD, but there is a line of work that has been very helpful to some of them. We'll hear about a program at UC Davis helping veterans find new lives as farmers. That's tomorrow on KPBS Radio. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.